Good morning, welcome everyone, or good evening, depending on where you guys are joining us from. We're happy to see so many of you guys joining us today. My name is Esther and I will be today's moderator. I work in the International Relations Department with CSO Education Group. And my colleague is also here.
My name is Shane. I'm the Director of International Relations Department at CSO Education Group. And thank you very much for joining us, and I hope you will enjoy this webinar.
So just in case you guys missed me saying it earlier, your e-certificates will be given to you guys by email, so you can check your emails throughout the week. You should expect it within a few days after today. And also another reminder, all questions will be taken at the end after the presentation has concluded. So we're just going to go ahead and start. I'm hoping we have majority of people here that need to be here. Okay. So, let's see here. All right, so just kind of introducing who we are for some of you who aren't familiar with CSO Education Group. So some of our products and services include online and in-person study abroad opportunities. So most of them are short-term. They typically range between 1 to 2 months. We work with a lot of different universities. So some of our partner universities are located in Canada, the USA, Europe, Taiwan, Malaysia, Thailand, Korea, India, and China. We also host several virtual faculty-led programs. One example is our upcoming entrepreneurship program. So if any of you guys are interested in any of these programs, feel free to reach out to us. We're more than happy to share information with you. We also offer a lot of different online and in-person university courses that you can take for credit. So there's a lot of different options. And in fact, Dr. Jason Dean also teaches a few of those courses. So feel free to check them out and check our website for more information. There are scholarships and financial aid available to students if you need it. And we also offer a lot of tutoring and academic support. Okay, so here's some of our contact information. We'd love to have you guys join us, contact us, and reach out to us. So you can email us, you can join us in our Telegram group or our Kakao Talk. And we also have a Facebook group, so we will send you guys that information later in case you're looking to join. But feel free to follow our page and to follow us on Instagram if you'd like. So if you want, you can take a picture of this screen so you can use it for your reference later. Okay. So now I'm just going to introduce our speaker, our guest speaker for today, Dr. Jason Dean. With a PhD from McGill University, Dr. Dean is an economics instructor at Wilfred Laurier University, as well as a professor of economics at Sheridan College. His primary teaching and research specialties include macroeconomics, microeconomics, labor economics, and economics of health and housing. Dr. Dean has numerous academic publications and holds various research, training, and curriculum development roles. So with that, I'll turn things over now to him and let him begin his presentation on economics and everyday living. So welcome.
Thank you very much, Esther. Okay. So hi everyone, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to attend my webinar. Today I'm going to talk about the ways in which economics can help you in your everyday life. Some of you may think, well, economics is too theoretical or abstract and has nothing to offer in terms of practical uses. However, I'm going to hopefully convince you otherwise today. So I'm going to cover the following concepts. So I'm going to talk about opportunity cost. This is arguably one of the most important concepts that you can apply in your everyday life. It's what you have to give up every time you make a decision. There is a cost associated with it. The next concept is sunk cost fallacy. Here I'm going to try and convince you that you should always cut your losses. Next, I'm going to talk about diminishing marginal utility. Essentially here, whenever you consume a good, you consume more and more of it, the amount of satisfaction you get falls, and I'm going to try and convince you that you should always strive for variety. And then next, I'm going to talk about price discrimination. and some ways in which online retailers trick you into paying more than someone else for the same good. Then I'm going to talk about the simple supply and demand model and how you can use it to understand sometimes seemingly confusing economic phenomenon in everyday life that you observe. And then I'm going to finish up with a concept from behavioral economics, and hopefully it can help you lose weight. Okay, so let's start with opportunity cost. So I'm going to pose a simple question. Suppose your friend offers to take you out for a free lunch. Is it really free? What do you think?
We've got a lot of no's here.
Okay, I was just looking for the chat function. Okay, so of course you're correct. The answer is no. Well, why? Well, every time you make a choice, you're giving up what the next best alternative is. Even though the lunch is free, your time is scarce, right? Your time isn't unlimited, and you of course could have done something else with that time. And so whatever else you could have done with that time is a cost. It's something you're giving up. So you could have done something else with your time. You could have visited your spouse. You could have studied economics, or of course you could have watched a CSO webinar. So just as an overview, I'm not sure how many of you have taken principles of economics, but opportunity cost arises because resources are scarce. So time, money, etc. Everything is scarce. And so every time we make a decision to use a particular resource, there's a trade-off, right? We must consider what we gain as well as what we give up. So in essence, because things are scarce, that forces us to make choices that involve opportunity costs. So in general, economists refer to opportunity cost as the next best foregone alternative. So let's think about another example. Suppose that you're at the mall and you make a decision to buy an ice cream cone. Well, we typically make those kind of decisions just based on whether we want it or not. And we ignore something very important, and that's the opportunity cost. In order to make proper decisions when we're shopping, we should ask ourselves the following question. How much do we value the particular good we're going to buy? In this example, we were thinking of the ice cream cone. And we should also ask, what am I giving up to buy it? Is there something else I could spend my money on that would make me happy? Remember, your money is scarce. So every time you make a decision to spend it, you're giving up something else. So when you make a decision, you want to actually be maximizing the purchase. You want to be buying something that has the most value and giving up the least. So a similar logic can be used when you're shopping on Amazon or Taobao or any of these online sites. Now, I have another question for you. Is there an opportunity cost to doing nothing?
Yes, we've got some people saying yes, of course.
We have some no's, but then a lot of yeses. So the answer, of course, is yes. So some particular examples, of course, would be thinking of investment. So if you were just to think of a simple example where we have two new graduates and one were to invest 10% of their first year's salary and say, put that in a locked in RSP so they can't touch it till their retirement, and then someone else does not. Well, you can imagine because of compound interest, there would be a huge opportunity cost for the person that doesn't do this when they're at retirement, because whatever that amount is, say it's $5,000, that's going to grow into a significant amount by the time someone retires, just from making that one small investment. So that's just one example. There are, of course, many examples. Another example would be the COVID-19. Of course, if we do nothing about it, we could have many, many lives being lost. So just in terms of key takeaways for opportunity cost, you always have to remember any decision you make always has an opportunity cost, because you're either talking about your time or some type of resource that you're going to be using. For us, we're usually thinking of spending our money. And we always want to think about what's the best foregone alternative. Are we making that decision or are we not? We want to be, we want to have it so that the decision we're making, we're reducing the opportunity cost as much as possible. And so the right way to make, decisions in daily life, especially when you're thinking about shopping, is to require you to always consider the opportunity cost. So making decisions on how to spend your time and money should not be done in isolation. You want to consider all of the alternatives. Now, this one's one of my favorites, the sunk cost fallacy. So suppose you just bought a non-refundable ticket at the movie theater, so you can't get your money back. After 15 minutes, you realize you can't stand the movie, you don't like it at all, you're sure it's not going to get better. So the question is, should you continue watching the movie to get your money's worth? What do you think? So we got a bit of mixed results, but mostly no's here. So again, we can kind of think about the opportunity cost as well here. Well, you're not going to get your money back. Now, your time, the time for the remainder of the movie, you're never going to get back. So if you stay and watch it and suffer, you're not going to get that time back. So why would you do that? Why not do something else that would make you more happy? So the answer is clearly no. The opportunity cost of continuing to watch the movie is too high, because you hate it so much that almost anything else you will like better, and you're not going to get your money back. So there's no reason for you to continue watching the movie. You can also think of a similar logic in terms of an all-you-can-eat buffet. Should you gouge yourself and get really full and eat too much just because you paid money to get into the all-you-can-eat buffet? But it's a sunk cost. You're never going to get that money back. So in general, the sunk cost fallacy is basically the tendency for people to continue a behavior or continue pursuing an option just because they've invested time or money or some other resource into it. So the key takeaway is that there's nothing you can do to regain that lost money. So if you continue to pursue something that makes you unhappy, that's not going to get your money back, right? It's going to make you worse off. You're just going to be digging a deeper hole. So the next concept is diminishing marginal returns. And so let's motivate this with some questions. Whatever your favorite food is, let's say it's pizza. Why don't we just eat that every day? And we all like money, so why don't we just spend all of our time working and getting as much money as possible? And also, if you think there's cases, many situations where if you think of someone getting an extra $1,000 in income, well, that's not always going to provide us the same amount of utility or happiness. Someone who makes $200,000 a year, if they get an extra $1,000, that's not going to be such a big deal to them. But someone who makes $10,000 a year, it would. So what is sort of the answer for all these questions? Does anyone have any insights? Okay, well, I'll just move on. So the main reason is the law of diminishing marginal return or marginal utility. And this is just, humans by nature prefer variety. When we consume a good or service, we're going to get some satisfaction to that, but that satisfaction is going to fall on the margin each time we consume an additional unit. So if you just think in general, the key takeaway here would be always strive for variety. If you strive for variety, then you're not going to be experiencing the diminishing marginal utility for each of the particular goods. So you should always strive for variety the best you can. That will end up giving you a higher overall level of satisfaction. Now, price discrimination. So what is price discrimination? So this is when a firm would charge different prices for the exact same product or service, but they charge different people prices based on their willingness to pay. Now, it's not really easy to determine what someone's willingness to pay is. In auctions, for example, that's possible, but for the most part, it's not. But firms do try to find ways to identify people's willingness to pay. And then the reason they would want to do this rather than just charging a single price to all their consumers is that they would obviously get higher profits. So the main idea is the firm's trying to charge a different price to people who are more or less price sensitive. So if consumers have very inelastic demand, in other words, they're not sensitive to price, so they're going to buy the good no matter what the price is. So they have a higher willingness to pay, so you would want to charge them a higher price. But for consumers who are more price sensitive, you would charge them a lower price. And if you do this strategy as a firm, you will make more profits than just charging a single price. And so, of course, companies know this simple concept. One of the best examples are online retailers. And I don't know if you know this, but they have an algorithm in many cases that will charge different prices to different consumers. So it will take into account different variables before proposing a price. So for example, some of the variables could be where the person is shopping from, how they've spent on the platform in the past, because they could get this information. And a lot of this information comes from, cookies, tracking cookies on your computer. And from that, they can get your internet activity. They can determine things like if you frequently shop at luxury stores. So if you do, they could charge you a higher price. So they're very tricky, and they have quite complex algorithms these days in order to implement a form of price discrimination. So one of the key takeaways here is, well, these are kind of technical, but one thing you could do is delete your cookies and browser cache, make sure that information about your shopping patterns isn't available to them. And then you can also use a virtual private network or VPN, and then you can appear to be coming from another country. Now, I've put a link here if you're interested later on. You can visit. It's an interesting article that goes into more detail on this. But there are other examples as well. So airlines, for example, also have an algorithm, as we just talked about, and they will charge different prices depending on the season or the type of the day of the week. So business travelers, which have a higher willingness to pay, would be more interested in flying at certain times rather than non-business consumers. So there are many ways they can sort of estimate what your willingness to pay is and charge different prices. Another example is coupons. So again, firms can't really determine precisely which of their customers have a higher, lower willingness to pay. But with coupons, they sort of provide an incentive for the consumers who have a low willingness to pay, because coupons take time and effort to collect. So only those with a low willingness to pay would spend time to do that. So that's a way of charging different prices to different consumers based on their willingness to pay. Loyalty cards is also another example. We know as you consume more, if you have the same coffee from the same place every day, that's not variety like we talked about before. Your marginal utility may fall. So one way to, in essence, get people to buy more would be to reward them for buying more from their particular business. Airbnb is another example. They've recently announced a pricing tool that will charge different prices based on the supply and demand conditions in a local area. And then if you're in Canada, I'm sure it's similar in other countries, but the cellular service companies tend to have a very complicated pricing scheme. It's not, exactly easy. And so if you're interested in getting a discount, or, if you're a consumer who has a low willingness to pay, well, then you have to go through, you have to spend a lot of time on the phone talking with them and going through the plan. It could take you an hour. So this is, in a sense, a way of price discrimination, because only those with low willingness to pay are going to, spend time to try and get a better price and waste a lot of time on the phone with the company. And also, a lot of companies will segment their markets by having different companies. For example, in Canada, there's a big company called Rogers, but they also have another smaller discount carrier, they're the same company, but they're just different names, and it's called Fido. So they're sort of segmenting the market. So consumers with who are more price sensitive might go to this company, and the consumers that are not will go to the other company and pay the higher prices. So I guess as an overall takeaway, when we think about price discrimination, you kind of want to masquerade as best as possible as a consumer with a low willingness to pay, because then you can get a better price. Okay, so now the simple supply and demand model can be used to explain different economic phenomenon that we see in real life that may be a bit confusing at first. One example is the diamond water paradox. And Adam Smith, who is the founder of economics, says it the best. He says, even though life cannot exist without water and can easily exist without diamonds, diamonds are pound for pound vastly more valuable or more expensive than water. So what's the solution to this paradox? Why is it that water, which is essential to life, is so cheap, but diamonds, which, aside from their ability as a tool to cut steel and that sort of thing, doesn't really have as much intrinsic value? Why then isn't water so expensive? Anyone have any ideas? Yeah, so I mean, if we think about just our simple supply and demand framework, the diamonds are very scarce relative to their demand. And so it's just a simple application of supply and demand. When you have something that's very scarce, but there's a reasonably high demand, then the price is going to be higher. With water, it's extremely abundant. It's relatively cheap to be able to purify and clean in most places. And so its price is much less. But the demand for water is still quite high, but it's just that the supply is also high. If the supply of water was scarce, you can bet that the price of water could be even more expensive than the price of diamonds. So we're kind of lucky that we live on a planet with lots of water. Now, this concept can also be applied when we're thinking of the labor market. So I'll pose a question: why do occupations that provide high levels of benefits, such as childcare workers, social workers, they're very valuable. They provide an excellent and a priceless service to society, but they make much less than, say, a professional baseball player. Professional baseball players make millions, but what they offer society, it's a good form of entertainment, but what they offer society certainly isn't nowhere near as important as social workers or even teachers. So again, what would the answer to this be? So we're close. So yeah, some of you have mentioned the supply issue. So we have to think about supply and demand though at the same time. So the demand for both of these, let's just assume that it's the same, but in terms of scarcity, obviously professional baseball players is a very rare talent. And so that's what's going to make it drive up the price that's paid for that particular skill. So again, it's a simple application of supply versus demand. The skills of professional baseball players are scarce, but if no one demanded to see, no one cared about watching someone with very good skills in baseball, then they could not get paid anything. But it's because also the demand to see them is quite high. And so the demand for childcare workers, et cetera, is also high, but that skill isn't as scarce. Someone can be trained to perform these jobs very quickly. And so in that case, you're not going to be rewarded as much in the labor market. So one key takeaway here is, since many of you are young, if you can, always try to get a skill that's scarce but in demand. So maybe new areas, emerging areas like big data, social media, skills related to these things could provide such an advantage. And so the last concept is something from behavioral economics. And a lot of research has shown that our long-term preferences don't align at all with our short-term preferences. And so this is called time inconsistent preferences. So for example, someone may decide on Monday to work out 3 times a week. But of course, when the time comes along, you decide to do something else. Well, one way to help mitigate this issue is through the use of commitment devices. And so these sort of make your short-term incentives align better with your longer-term goals. There's lots of examples of these. I'll give you a few that in terms of working out and trying to lose weight. In one particular example, there are some companies offer a program to get their employees to work more at the gym. And what they do is they have the employer put up money at risk. So you put up a certain amount of money, and basically if you don't go to the gym, you forfeit that money, and then the company donates it to charity. And so that kind of is that's a kind of a commitment mechanism. You make that decision to join this with your long-term preferences in mind. And then when you end up in everyday life, you have these short run, and in the short run, you where you would not make the choice. Well, now you have an incentive to continue making decisions based on your long-term preferences. Some other examples could be, having an automatic text message to make sure you go to the gym or remind you, or even something like committing to work out with a friend at a particular time every 3 days a week, or whatever you want to work out, because it's a little harder to cancel when you've agreed with your friend to work out at the same time. Okay, so I guess the key takeaway here is, when you're trying to do things like working out, or, when you're thinking, when you have these long-term preferences and you're trying to make sure you accomplish them in the short run, try to think of some clever commitment devices that can help you achieve that. And I've also provided a link here to a really good article on this topic. So let's finish up with some questions just to see if you were all paying attention. So the first question here asks you to consider the following puzzle. And it's not so much of a puzzle after we look at the solution. So imagine that you have a free ticket, which you cannot resell, to see Radiohead performing. This is just a music band. But by a staggering coincidence, you could also go to see Lady Gaga, who's another musical performer. And there are tickets on sale for $40. Now, for this particular event, you'd be willing to pay $50 to see Lady Gaga on any given night, and her concert is the best alternative to seeing Radiohead. And now let's assume there's no other cost of seeing either gig. So let's just ignore any transportation costs or anything like that. So the question is, what is the opportunity cost of seeing Radiohead?
So we'll give you guys about a minute to answer that question. Okay, just a few more seconds to put your answers in. Okay, so we share the results. Are you able to see that, Jason?
Oh, yes, I can see that. I just couldn't see it beforehand.
Okay.
Okay, so it looks like we got a mixed bag of results here. However, the correct answer is B, and it looks like the majority were correct. So why is it $10? So let me just close this. So the answer is $10. So we need to think about what's going on here. So I'll put the solution on the next slide here. So we know that if we go to this Lady Gaga concert, it's going to cost us $40, but we'd be willing to pay $50. So the net benefit of seeing Lady Gaga is $10. And so we're asked, what's the opportunity cost of seeing the other band, Radiohead? And so we need to know what we're giving up to see Radiohead. And we're told enough information to get the value, which is $10. So if we decide instead to go to the Radiohead concert, we're giving up the value associated with the Lady Gaga concert, which would be $10. And if this person, or if a person decides to see Radiohead over Lady Gaga, it must be that they benefit, the value or benefit to them of the Radiohead concert is more than $10. Well, if they make that decision, well, it doesn't necessarily mean true, but typically you would want to make that decision if the value is greater than $10. Okay, so next question. So the sunk cost fallacy occurs when, which one of the following responses here is correct? Try to remember what the definition of the sunk cost fallacy was.
Okay, so we'll end the poll now.
Okay, good job. The correct answer is C. So 50% of you got it right. And I mean, this is just the definition. So the sunk cost fallacy is when you want to make up for that sunk cost, but you're never going to be able to get that back. So you're, for example, the movie theater example, you're going to be continuing this activity, even though there's a negative return to you, just because you have this illusion that you're going to recover your past costs. Okay, so we can move on to the next question. All of the following are examples of price discrimination except. And so for this question, keep in mind, you're looking for where whatever these options are, they need to be somehow getting at someone's willingness to pay. Okay.
So we'll give you guys about 10 more seconds to put in your answers. All right.
Okay, so again, the majority of you got it right. So we have that the correct answer is D. So if we think about these options, the first one here, clearly there's going to be, people might have a different willingness to pay for an afternoon session rather than say an evening session. So that's again trying to get at people's willingness to pay. Buy one, get one free offers. So again, this is trying to get at, people's willingness to pay is going to fall as they consume more of the same good because of diminishing marginal utility. So in this way, they're charging a lower price to get them to buy more. Early bird specials might be a way to charge lower prices to senior citizens who tend to get up earlier in the morning. And so this again is getting at the willingness to pay. But D, buy now, pay later, it's not so clear that this one here has anything to do with willingness to pay. Okay, you could probably maybe think of some ways, but out of all of the responses here, this one is, you know, the one that it's not very clear at all, where the other ones are very clear. Okay, so next question. Which one of the following provides the most complete explanation of why an average professional baseball player is paid more than 100 times as much as a daycare worker?
Okay, so just 5 more seconds before we close this poll.
Okay, good. So about 50% of you got the correct answer. So the correct answer is C. Okay, now here, you know, some of these other answers like B and D may seem to be correct because they're true. I mean, there are certainly fewer professional baseball players than daycare workers, but that doesn't give a complete explanation because you could have fewer baseball players, so they're more scarce. But if there's no demand, then that's not going to explain why they get paid 100 times more. And similarly for D, the demand for baseball players is greater than daycare workers. Well, I mean, that could be true, but it's not saying anything about supply. So, and then this E is just sort of a distractor. And A, it says, you know, professional baseball players are more skilled than persons who get less pay. Well, that has nothing to do with supply and demand. So the correct answer is C because it incorporates both the supply and demand characteristics. So, you know, relative to the demand for them, baseball players are more scarce. So you could think of maybe holding constant demand, baseball players are more scarce and that's why they get paid more. Okay, so last question. In an effort to lose weight, Danny posts flyers all over town that offer a reward of $50 to anyone who catches him eating unhealthy food. So this one's quite simple. I want to see everyone, I want to see 100% here. So Danny's flyers are an example of a
Okay, so we'll give you guys about 10 more seconds to put in your answers. All right.
Okay, well, I was hoping for 100%, but I'll take what I can get. So this is exactly an example of a commitment mechanism or commitment device that would help this person lose weight. So, they want to work out at the gym. That's their long-term preference, but in the short run, they may decide not to for whatever reason. Maybe they're going to be lazy that day or something like that. With this sort of thing, they're trying to create a commitment mechanism. So they'll have to give someone $50 if they catch them not, well, in this case, it's eating unhealthy food, okay, not going to the gym. But again, the idea here is that it's a commitment device so that you achieve a certain outcome. Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed the webinar and learned a few practical tips on how economics can help you in daily life. Now, I guess, do we have time for some questions or?
Yeah, we've got about 5 minutes for some questions. So if anyone has any questions, we do have some people here who asked during the presentation. Someone here asked if you could explain a little bit how COVID-19, what kind of impact it's had on the economy in terms of supply and demand.
Well, that's a good question. It's actually had a dramatic impact. So, I mean, it's not like your typical economic shock. Usually, like if, for example, in the last financial crisis, you had the economy was in a sense broken. You had all kinds of issues in the U.S. with the housing market, and so there was some sort of a bubble type thing where this is completely different. There wasn't any issues with supply and demand, and actually the economy was performing quite well. In Canada and the US, we had the lowest unemployment rate in decades. So nothing was really broken, but all of a sudden, of course, we had to artificially reduce demand through reducing, for putting these limitations on people going out to eat dinner, etc. So, I mean, the impacts are nothing like we've seen since the Great Depression. In the Great Depression, the unemployment rate was initially around 25%. We were for a little bit getting not nowhere near that, but somewhat close. And a lot of the reasons why we didn't get that high is because there was a lot of government intervention there in the form of paying companies to not lay off workers, etc. But I mean, the amount of GDP, if you remember, gross domestic product is how much a country produces produces of goods and services in a year, and that's exactly what our income is as well. And so a substantial portion of that has been lost. There's a lot of mutually beneficial transactions that just have not occurred. And we're losing. I can't remember exact estimates, but something maybe like in the range of 20% lower GDP. So the costs are substantial. And even if you think of the government has helped out, but that's going to cost us down the road. For example, estimates of the deficit in Canada from the federal government this year might be in the range of $200 billion. So the impacts are very substantial, and I mean, some of them could be lingering as well. So I hope that someone answered your question.
Yeah. Someone also asked earlier whether dumping in economics was a form of price discrimination.
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, in a sense it is. Oh, well, no, actually, I guess it depends on how you frame it. But when we think of price discrimination, we're thinking of a firm charging its consumers different prices based on their willingness to pay. So dumping there's some other things going on there. They're going to try and sell it in another country, but I'm not exactly sure if that means that they're thinking that the other country is going to have a lower willingness to pay. But when you think of price discrimination, I wouldn't I would think of it more, just don't think of it in terms of trade issues. Think of it in terms of a strategy for firms to gain more revenue. by charging different prices to different consumers.
So we also have someone asking a question about, well, what your opinion is on how the economy can recover back to its normal state post-COVID.
Well, I mean, I don't know how it looks like we are not going to really get back to normal until we have some sort of a vaccine. I mean, because it's going to be really tough on service businesses and restaurants, because a lot of these businesses, they need to have 80% or more capacity. I'm just roughly estimating that number, but their margins aren't very high. Restaurants aren't going to be profitable if they're only having, say, 50% capacity. So until we're able to get some sort of vaccine and we don't need to worry about this anymore, I don't think the economy is going to get back to normal. Once this is gone, we'll get back to normal, but there are going to be some probably structural changes. I mean, a lot of companies now are realizing that it's a good idea to have their employees work from home. And so you can think of the commercial real estate industry as being adversely affected. So there's things like that could linger on and result in changes going forward. But I mean, until if we keep seeing these spikes like in the US, and, it just seems that this is a very contagious virus. So it's going to be really hard for restaurants and service industries to remain. And so, there's going to be that segment of the economy and some others that aren't going to be able to return back to normal until we get rid of this virus.
So I think we have time for only one more question. There's a lot of great questions here, but we just don't have time to get to all of them. Someone did ask if you have any recommendations for books that they might be able to learn a little bit more about economics and have a better background of it, if you have anything to suggest.
Let me think. Well, if you're one good book for the statistics side or econometric side of economics is called Mostly Harmless Econometrics. In terms of just your standard economics, I think there are a number of good textbooks. If you want, some have a different aim than others. Some are more practical minded, some are more theoretical. Perhaps if you wanted to send me an email, or I could maybe send you some specific sources for that, I could send them maybe to Esther to send to you.
Okay. Yep. So if anyone has questions about the textbook or wanting to learn more about economics, please send us an email. You can send us an email to info@canadasummer.ca. And there's a few of you who have been asking about a feedback link. So there's no feedback link as long as you've attended this webinar using the invitation that was sent out to you. Then your name will be recorded on the attendance list, and we will send you the e-certificate by email within a week of today's webinar. So please check your emails, and we will send those out very shortly. Thank you so much, Dr. Jason Dean, for your time and for explaining so well about the different ways that economics applies to our day-to-day living. Thank you guys for joining us, and we hope to see you guys join us for the next webinar. So please join our groups, join us on social media so you can stay updated. We'd love to hear from you, and yeah, we look forward to seeing you guys next time, and thanks again.
Thank you very much.
Take care. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.